so good to be here with you, and so good also always to follow Sandrine and Sharon. Thank you so much for this. I think obviously it's a fantastic day. I've heard the words sort of hope and urgency. And building on what Sharon has been saying, I think we have the money. We have over $380 trillion, $380 trillion in the global financial system. And we need to make sure that all of this is pointing towards net zero resilience, and it's delivered through a just transition for workers and communities. Clearly, today's summit, Leaders Summit, hosted by President Biden, is a great sign of hope. The importance that President Biden has put on the role of good paying union jobs in delivering the transition, I think has really been highlighted around the world. And again, just to say that with the US back in full force on the climate track, it's good to see at the G20 level that the sustainable finance work is ongoing. So the machine is starting to work again. But we know that we have urgency. We know that we have the COVID crisis with millions having already died, a health catastrophe, deepened inequality, and we're not recovering in a green way as we had hoped last Earth Day, but we're being led out of the recovery by a rebound in coal. So some of the things that I think maybe we could focus on, particularly as we're talking about finance. First is the step up in the voluntary commitments we're seeing from the sector. Yesterday, the Glasgow Alliance of Finance for Net Zero, GFANZ, 160 banks, insurers, investors with 70 trillion committing to net zero. Fantastic to see that. I would like to see more investors, more banks going early. In my country, the UK, the British Telecom Pension Fund has set a 2035 target for net zero. And this does need to include plans for phasing out investment in fossil fuels in line with the interests of workers and communities. So that's the first, a voluntary commitment, really important to get the financial sector movement. But I think, as we've already heard, net zero sort of investment needs to be matched with net zero central banking. That we need to make sure that the commitments are credible, have integrity, and also that they all do add up at the financial system level. And that's the role of central banks and supervisors. We're very encouraged, I think, to see the leadership now, 90 central banks taking action on greening the financial system. And now I think there's a time this year as we move towards COP to see those central banks making explicit commitments to net zero and also to just transition. We're already starting to see the first signs of that. The Bank of England now has net zero in its remit. And I think we'll see more of these types of commitments in the coming months. We need all financial firms to come forward with a net zero plan. And we need climate factors to be incorporated in the way that central banks purchase assets, refinance the bonds they buy, and so on. But as Sharon has laid out, and also Sandrine, this is not just net zero. This has to be just zero. This has to be justice at the heart of it. And in terms of the work we've been doing in partnership in the past with the ITUC, with Sharon, with the PRI and others, we're seeing increasing recognition from investors that they need to incorporate just transition, the S of ESG, into the way they drive climate action. So we're seeing that in a number of ways. The shareholder voice is being expressed in terms of the expectations that big shareholders, the workers' capital that Sharon mentioned, the expectations now include just transition. And if I could give one shout out to the Friends Provident Foundation and the Royal London Asset Management, who led a process of shareholder engagement in the UK with one of the energy utilities, SSE, which has come forward with a specific just transition plan, thinking about what needs to happen both for the transitioning out of high carbon, but also the transitioning into net zero. So shareholders can and must use their voice, but we also need to think about new assets, new types of bonds, governments are issuing green sovereign bonds. We think that those can be linked to also social purpose to develop a sort of green plus model of finance. And where should we be focusing our attention? The focus obviously should be in terms of mobilizing finance for the global south. This is where the countries and communities most vulnerable to climate change, where the greatest investment needs are, but we know where this is where the greatest cost of capital is. The capital is highest priced in developing emerging economies, and also access to finance is least. So clearly, again, this year we need to make sure that the long-standing 10-year-old commitment to mobilize 100 billion is delivered by governments of industrialized countries. But how can we also ensure that we have these routine flows of climate finance, the trillions that Sharon was pointing to, into net zero, into resilience, into just transition, into the world's developing and emerging economies? And these pension funds, again, are responsible to, ultimately, ordinary citizens, workers around the world. And I think that is a great new track of climate finance that we need to build. So I would like to end there, again, highlighting, acknowledging the great work that's now being done by governments, making their pledges, the pledges by banks and investors, the key role for central banks, but always with an eye to the global south, and perhaps thinking through, again, how Mahatma Gandhi, I think, has sort of told us about when we're in doubt, particularly when we're in doubt about net zero, we really need to think about the poorest and the weakest man or woman that we have, and direct our thoughts and energies towards that, and make sure net zero benefits those people. Thank you.